After an extravagantly luxurious engagement party, my fiancé disappeared. He left behind only a letter, stating that his childhood friend was terminally ill and her only wish was to see the northern lights in Iceland. On the day he returned to the country, I personally went to call off the engagement. Beside Charles Torres, Bruno was in tears, sobbing weakly. "I'm sorry, Patricia. I've made things difficult for you. I'll leave now and never interfere with your lives again." He shielded Alice behind him, his expression cold. "If you dare lay a hand on Alice, I'll take your life," I scoffed. "I won't do anything to her. First, she's filthy and I don't want to dirty my hands for her. And second, I fear what this crazy woman will do to me." "Patricia Nelson, what do you mean by that?" Charles glared at me, his eyes bloodshot as if they might burst into flames. Behind him, Alice buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Seeing his beloved in such a state, Charles didn't even bother to argue back, but quickly comforted Alice, enveloping her in his arms. "Alice, don't be afraid. It's not your fault. She just yelled too loudly and scared you." I was almost amused by his outrage and tossed a piece of paper at him. It was a health report, proving Alice was perfectly healthy. I wanted Charles to see the truth, to realize what absurd things he had done under deception. Charles didn't even glance at it, tossing it aside. "Patricia, I never knew you were such a heartless woman. You know Alice can't handle stress, and yet you forge lies to frame her. She's still sick, and you keep causing such scenes. Can't you be more considerate? Tolerate?" It turned out in Charles's heart, I was just being unreasonable. I laughed mockingly at myself, took a deep breath, and held back the tears in my eyes. It turned out that our 10 years of acquaintance and 7 years of love seemed to weigh less to him than a single tear from Alice. Whatever Alice wanted to eat, he'd go out to buy it even in the rain. If Alice was in a bad mood, he'd stay up all night to keep her company. When Alice was sick and hospitalized, he was there without rest, always by her side. And every time I argued with him, all I got in return was the same answer. "I see Alice as my own sister. You're overthinking it." He even kept psychologically manipulating me, insisting that since I loved him, I should respect his female friend. Just thinking about this pair, who masqueraded as righteous siblings but were as close as childhood sweethearts, made me sick. I looked coldly at Charles. "I've already called off our engagement, and I won't overthink anymore." Perhaps it was because my expression was too serious. A flicker of something I couldn't read passed through Charles's eyes. Confusion? I couldn't tell. He released Alice's hand, his expression unkind. "The news about Alice came too suddenly. I didn't have time to tell you, but I left you a letter too. What are you still unsatisfied with? We were engaged, yet you made a joke of breaking up with me. Patricia, don't you think you're being childish? Childish?" I brushed away Charles's outstretched hand and slowly removed the dazzling ring from my finger, the ring Charles had personally slipped on. Back then, his eyes were filled only with my reflection. "Patricia, trust me. I really want to marry you." As I pulled off the ring, the handsome face of the past was replaced by his current sullen look. I threw the ring at his face. "I sorry, Mr. Torres, since you disagree with breaking up, then now, it's me dumping you." The old Charles Torres, not so much. He and I met at a party. At that time, he was the crown prince of the capital that everyone fought to please, while I was just a second generation of the demolition of the people looked down upon. The princes and princesses of the capital met each other early on, and have long since formed a united xenophobic alliance with each other. They looked at me with unmerciful taunts in their eyes. "Who do I think it is? The daughter of a thug? How can she have the nerve to mingle in a banquet like this? Yenji, don't you think so?" Charles Torres, who had been asked, merely frowned, his handsome face turned and scanned the group impatiently. "If you have nothing to do, go out and find some amusement. Don't gather around here to make noise and annoy people." The crowd disperses and Charles Torres looks me in the face and leans over and snorts softly. Empty gestures. I'm not slow to drop the slate I've hidden behind my back. If Charles Torres hadn't relieved himself, the gent at the front of the party would have been opened up. Looking back at Charles Torres's cold face, I returned it with the same flirtatious tone. Sick in the head, and yet, I didn't realize that Charles Torres was stalking me because of those 4 words. In his words, no one had ever dared to call him sick in the head to his face, and he made sure to show me what he was made of. And when I found out, I just left a faint comment. "No one ever dares to say it to your face. Is it because everyone talks like that behind your back?" And that, unfortunately, fell on the ears of Charles Torres. He was furious and declared to the group of followers who held him up almost as an emperor that he would not take Gu's name if he didn't make me apologize to him on my knees in front of the whole school. I rode by on my bike and fished out a handful of mud to throw on his handmade custom shirt. Emperor Gu instantly turned into a little beggar, and while his followers couldn't hold back their laughter, I had already ridden away in a puff of smoke. I thought we'd keep looking at each other like this, but the very next day, he saved me from a robbing van. Just one step away from being knocked to my bones, I gasped in Charles Torres' arms. I didn't even notice that my back was pressed against his chest, and his body heat was ironing through the thin layer of his shirt. I thanked him in shock, but Charles Torres laughed. It was the first time I had ever seen him smile that softly. "If you want to thank me, be my girlfriend. Maybe it's because of the danger they've just experienced." My heart was beating violently in my chest like a drum, but I knew I could never say yes to him. Let's put aside for a moment whether or not he did it on a whim. Just that huge gap in family history between us was enough to torment me and him. I righted the strap of my book bag and unceremoniously distanced myself from him. I'd better go to the school gates and apologize to you on my knees. I didn't end up on my knees. Because the van wasn't an accident, it was a plot devised by the robbers. They want to kidnap me and use me to get money from my parents. I told them calmly, my dad remarried, and they can't wait for you to get me killed. There's no way they're going to pay you. But how could the kidnappers believe it? They approached step by step with sharp knives. Just then, a silhouette rushed out. It's Charles Torres. Protecting me, he only dropped it coldly. Run, go to the police. I wasn't in the mood for any you go now you don't go now I won't go now drama with him, but instead exerted the fastest speed I've ever had and darted to a public phone booth to bring in help. When the police arrive, Charles Torres has a knife in the small of his back and has been unconscious for many hours.